Hey guys, welcome back to Sleepless Historian. Go ahead and dim the lights, get comfortable, and let your mind begin to unwind. Tonight, we're not going to be visiting the grand, gilded courts of Europe or the dusty tombs of ancient kings. Instead, we're going to float over to a much younger, much colder part of the world, British North America in the mid-19th century. It's a place of vast forests, stubborn colonial outposts, and a cast of characters who were, shall we say, a special kind of dysfunctional. We're going to talk about the birth of a nation, Canada, to be specific. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a civics lesson. We're not here for dry politics. We're here for the awkward handshakes, the petty rivalries, the questionable decisions, and the absurd amount of champagne that fueled the whole affair. This is the story of how a handful of ambitious, flawed, and occasionally drunk politicians stumbled their way into creating a country, almost by accident. So just relax, close your eyes if you feel like it, and let's drift back to the 1860s, to a time when the idea of a single Canada was mostly a punchline. So, the stage, the mid-1800s, British North America is not one big, happy family. It's more like a collection of distant cousins who really don't want to talk to each other at holiday dinners. You have the province of Canada, which was itself a forced, unhappy marriage between Upper Canada, mostly English-speaking Protestants, soon to be Ontario, and Lower Canada, mostly French-speaking Catholics, soon to be Quebec. They were yoked together in 1841 and had spent the last 2 decades in a state of perpetual political gridlock. Imagine 2 people tied together, both trying to walk in opposite directions. That was the Canadian government. It was exhausting. Then, way out on the east coast, you have the maritime colonies, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. They saw themselves as distinct, sophisticated, seafaring people. They traded more with Britain and the United States than they did with the inland Canadians, who they viewed as a bunch of lumberjacks and political hotheads. And Newfoundland. Newfoundland was off in its own world entirely, and wanted to keep it that way. The whole arrangement was fragile. The American Civil War was raging just to the south, and the British were getting a little tired of footing the bill to defend these scattered, bickering colonies. The threat of American expansionism was very real. There was a general, uneasy feeling that something had to change. The first move came from the Maritimes. In the spring of 1864, they had a sensible, modest idea. They thought, hey, why don't the 3 of you Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI get together and talk about forming our own little union, a maritime union? It was a practical, small-scale plan. They decided to meet in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, in September. It was all very low-key, a quiet, regional conference. The word of this little meeting reached the perpetually deadlocked province of Canada, and in the smoke-filled backrooms of Quebec City, a strange and desperate plan began to form. The government there was being run by something called the Great Coalition. This was, in itself, a historical oddity. It was an alliance between 3 men who, on a personal level, mostly couldn't stand each other. First, you had John A. Macdonald, the man who would become Canada's first Prime Minister, a brilliant, witty, and deeply pragmatic lawyer from Kingston. He was a master of political maneuvering, a man who could charm a bird from a tree. He was also, and this is crucial to his story, a legendary drinker. His life was a balancing act between political genius and personal chaos, often fueled by copious amounts of gin and wine. His personal life was marked by tragedy, a chronically ill first wife, a son who died in infancy, and a daughter born with a severe disability. He carried a deep well of sadness, which he often tried to drown. His partner in government was George D. Cartier, a fiery, energetic, and fiercely proud French-Canadian from Montreal. In his youth, he had been a rebel, fighting against the British crown. Now, he was a pragmatic conservative, a railway lawyer who believed the only way to protect French-Canadian culture was to be part of a larger, stronger federation where their rights were constitutionally guaranteed. He was short, powerful, and often compared himself to Napoleon. Of course he did. And the third, deeply uncomfortable member of this trio was George Brown, the owner of the hugely influential Globe newspaper in Toronto. Brown was a tall, stern, moralizing Scottish reformer. For years, his life's work had been to passionately oppose everything Macdonald and Cartier stood for. He saw Macdonald as a corrupt, drunken rogue and Cartier as a puppet of the Catholic Church. The fact that he was now in a coalition with them shows you just how broken Canadian politics had become. They all agreed that the only way to fix their broken government was to blow it up and start over with a much bigger country. So, when these three men heard about the quiet little conference in Charlottetown, a light bulb went on. They saw their chance. They decided, in essence, to crash the party. They sent a telegram to the Maritimes, asking, "Hey, we hear you're having a little get-together. Mind if we come? We have a slightly bigger idea we'd like to pitch." The Maritimers, probably a bit bewildered, couldn't exactly say no, so they reluctantly agreed. And so, in late August 1864, the Canadian delegation boarded a steamship, the SS Queen Victoria. They weren't just bringing themselves and their big ideas, they brought their wives, their daughters, and, most importantly, a massive supply of champagne, something like 500 bottles of it, for a trip that would last a few weeks. Because, if you're going to attempt a hostile takeover of a political conference, you might as well do it with style and a lot of bubbly. As the Queen Victoria steamed down the St. Lawrence River, past the green shores of the Gaspé Peninsula and out into the Gulf, the fate of British North America hung in the balance. The Canadians were a delegation of sworn enemies, united by a desperate, last-ditch plan, heading uninvited to a conference that wasn't for them. Armed with a few vague ideas and an ocean of champagne,